Psycho, in just one assertion that synthesized the big extension of its content, is a journey towards the confines and dimension of the original trauma of the subject. This film is about, on one side, a tormented and enigmatic subject named Norman Bates, who will be an involuntary participant of three conceptual postulates of Immanuel Kant. This will be manifested through the film in key moments of the narrative that will serve as a cornerstone to this ode to philosophy, that is, Psycho. On other side, this play is not only presented from the Norman Bates one-side perspective, but also it is exposed from the cognitive prism of the experiences of Marion Crane, who at the same time serves to exemplify a quintessential example of the journey of gallantry and the daringness against the status quo of a traditionalist morality. With that said, it is clear that in order to break down and apprehend what this film postulates, it is necessary to read from both narrative poles. On one hand, Norman Bates, and on the other, Marion Crane. The three conceptual mandates aforementioned followed by Norman Bates are the following: the ethical imperative for the perpetual peace, the epistemology based on the notions of the noumenon and phenomenon, the deconstructions towards classic metaphysics with the final purpose of setting the limits of reasoning and cognizance. Hitchcock, the film's director, in what it seems to be a poetical will, pretends to induce the viewer within a philosophical paradise by the subtle exposure of what seems to be a traditional American comedy, which will later be subverted and deconstructed through the experiences and journeys of Marion Crane. This generic white comedy is a sort of avant-garde narrative that hides a nod to modern philosophy never seen by its contemporaries. Through the use of the mythical car sequence, Hitchcock shows us the Cartesian Rex Extensa by means of the subtle inclusion of a paranoia in the general mood of Marion Crane. It's within this plethora of metaphysical concepts in which Alfred builds his deliberations, in which he submerges little by little in a philosophical entelechy like only a few times the human being will be lucky enough to be immersed in. All this narrative sees its culmination when Marion Crane meets with Norman Bates. The meeting makes Marion and the viewer realize the notion of madness that is perceived by the being only if it's a reasoning being. This makes us confront the assertion about the phenomenon beyond perception and the possibility of a phenomenon of madness itself. Later on, with a subtle and gentle offering, Norman reaches Marion Crane. It's by this scene in which we, as spectators, see the countenance of fine poetry that is drawn in Marion's face. And if that was not enough, the so desired cherry on the cake, the culmination of this communion of ideas, such as a sweet ecumenopolis of concepts, Norman deconstructs the classical metaphysics in an action that serves as an analogy of the journey that modern philosophy has walked in his path towards postmodern philosophy. In an act without comparison, Norman exposes the insubstantial basis of the pretentiousness of the dialect, which cannot find solid foundations on logic and reasoning. The concept of freedom, the Cartesian God, the monads, and other metaphysical conceptions are now laying naked, facing the final critique that Norman makes by dressing as his own mother, representing in this way the transition of the classical metaphysics to the new path beyond old schools of philosophy. In this manner, the beginning of transcendental idealism is now founded in a sort of poetical statement. All of the aforementioned events made enough room for the slasher genre to come into play, genre that became on his own by working on the solid conceptual terrain that Norman Bates funded. In synthesis, Psycho is an extensive and complex ode to Immanuel Kant's work that disguises itself as a psychological thriller or suspense film, is exquisite in its presentation and jazzy way of deliver profound topics. This movie has shown to be capable of inducing deep insights and disturbing sensations on its viewers, and, more important, in the Philosophical Academy. If you like this type of content for some bizarre reason, consider supporting me on Patreon to keep this project up. I will try to make one video per week of serious or ironic essays about movies, games, series, etc. So, stay tuned for more of this pretentious bullshit. Goodbye.